Hi. So I chose to do this in video format because I think if I was going to explain to somebody an overview of these things that we're going to discuss, that I would want to do it face to face. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is power distance. And power distance is something that for me, actually, I find to be very perplexing. Basically, it's the attitude of the culture toward the power inequalities amongst us. And when it comes to the US, power distance is tricky because we are so individualist. And so, for example, let's start with basically the fact that the United States is essentially a continent in itself. Oh, I'm from Oregon. Well, I'm from New York. Yeah, well, we're not the same. But then people look at you and they're like, but you're American. Oh yeah, but people in the Northwest are different than people from New York. It's that sort of thing that really, that individualist, that I think influences our high score of 91 as individualists influences our fairly low score of power distance, because the American premise is that we have rights to everything and that we expect for people to look after themselves. We also are accustomed to interacting with people that we don't know well. So when you look at the fact that we score linear active on Lewis's model, that makes a lot of sense. We have no problem just walking right up to somebody and talking to them. I think when you look at business, that's a big place, or in schools, for example, maybe the way a teacher addresses a student, our directness due to our individualist background, which again goes back to this idea of power distance. And I think, the power distance individualism thing, I'm using them interchangeably. I wouldn't say interchangeably, but I'd say I'm using them to show that they're very related when it comes to the way that Americans operate. It's really important to look at that. I think that I think that pretty much covers the two of them, because we have such a high score in individualism. And I remember I was 20 years old. It was the first time I studied abroad, and I was in Spain. And one of our instructors, we had like a cultural class, and they told us, they sat us down and they were like, so not everybody is individualist. And they explain this concept of individualism and how the US scores extremely high in comparison to most countries in the world. And I'll never forget that, because being American and individualist, it hit me hard, because I was like, oh, not everyone's like this. Well, because I'm like this, and so I assume that everyone else is like this because I'm individualist. So really interesting when you look at those two and the relationship that forms between them, and how kind of one plays upon the other when it comes to explaining the way that we do things in the US, and how we are so task-oriented, and we are extremely, we're all about planning and seeing problems and needing to analyze things and using policy and just all this directness that, can be really perplexing for other countries and other cultures that don't operate that way. Okay, so now let's talk about uncertainty avoidance, because that's a big one. So the US, for uncertainty avoidance, the US scores at a 46. So what does that mean? Basically, it's the way that a society deals with the fact that the future can never be known. So with a low score of 46, I think that Americans often, we have a fair degree of acceptance for new ideas, innovative products, and a willingness to try something different. But when it comes to emotionally expressing things and connections with other people. Americans tend to be more tolerant of ideas and opinions. What am I trying to say here? Let me stop there for a second. I'm going to rephrase that. We believe that we have freedom of expression. We believe that we are entitled to freedom of expression. Therefore, Americans don't require a lot of rules and are less emotionally expressive than higher scoring cultures in that regard. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to us being tolerant of ideas or opinions from anyone that allows freedom of expression, we are high on that. We will not avoid it. That one I struggle with because when we're so kind of aggressive in that way, that it can create, it can make members of another culture feel threatened or uncomfortable in unknown situations. And we have these created beliefs that are the foundation of sort of our existence, that say that, everybody has the same rights and everyone can express themselves the way that they feel. And the reality is that that doesn't exist in the rest of the world in many places. And so I think that Americans, we don't require a lot of rules, and we are less emotionally expressive than a lot of other cultures. So, for example, although we're direct, in some cultures, I'm thinking specifically North African cultures, score is higher, and there may be you hash it out and it's done and it's fine. Conflict is not a problem. But when it comes to Americans, we're not so comfortable with that. I hope that made sense. I'm trying my best to explain something that is perplexing to me as an American. So trying to explain it to someone else. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that I haven't tried to understand it. It means that it's something that I'm still continuing to struggle to understand, and I think that should be okay. I think communication is a really big one, and I find that it's really interesting, not only when we looked at the cross-cultural dimensions of Lewis and behavior, not only the way that the three different categories are broken up, but when you look at people in different jobs and different different jobs in different areas, in different categories. For example, engineers, or what people are more likely to be and where that falls on the spectrum for different cultures because of these things. So when it comes to communication, I'm going to stop this here and then just start up so this file isn't too long, because it's at 8:46 and I don't know if I'm going to be able to upload it. So pause real quick.